Hi, my name is Staci Neustadt. I'm the CEO at Making Sense of Autism, and I'm a speech language pathologist. Today, I am excited to really share with you our founder, Susan Golubock, and her journey and all of her experiences in life in terms of her late diagnosis and what it was like for her growing up. So Susan, tell us a little bit more. What was it like for you growing up and knowing who you were or not knowing who you were?
It was a very confusing time. When I was growing up, of course, I didn't think about myself as different. Um, I liked myself. I enjoyed my life. I much preferred to sit and play with my two clothespins and as if they were dolls. Only since I was a Gestalt language learner, everything was intonations, not really words. Words didn't seem important. Intonation did. Rather than play with my cousins or my siblings, because I didn't understand. That was confusing. My mother reports that I never liked being picked up and cuddled, so she didn't. Although I think I would have liked to have feel that bond. So I never really developed a bond with my mother or with my siblings because of my touch defensiveness. And so it was a confusing time. It wasn't until I started in school that I realized just how different I was. That um, I would come home and every day the teacher would call out our names and we were supposed to say, "Here, I'm present." Um, and the teacher would always call out this girl named Susan, but she was saying, um, Rusman, and I was a Russman. She wasn't pronouncing it correctly. And so I thought that was someone else. And this other Susan never answered, and she never called on me. So when I finally told my parents, they all laughed and said, "Oh, she's mispronouncing the name. So you should do it." That's when I realized I was struggling with understanding when people what they said. And when I would ask my siblings for information, like, well, why did they say that? Or what did they do? My siblings would laugh at me and they would say, well, everybody knows that. And they wouldn't answer me. So for years, I grew up just so angry because I wasn't getting answers to the questions of what I didn't know or understand. And it wasn't until I got my diagnosis and I began to realize how my brain worked differently that I realized that typical people pick things up on such an intuitive level, a non taught level, that they really can't explain what they know in words because they didn't learn it with words.
So, so it sounds like when you were younger, you were happy, you were fine. It
I
wasn't
wasn't.
until you were around others and that expectation was put upon you and was confusing, and no one would explain concretely what was going on. They just expected you to understand it. And I see that it is almost like cruelness where people say, well, why don't you know? And so I'm sure that was really stressful. And you talk about, your journey from before you were identified autistic to after. Do you feel like along that way, was there anyone that really took time to listen to you and understood you as an autistic individual?
Not growing up because I didn't even understand that you could be autistic and be highly intelligent, highly verbal. And it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I read an article saying that you can be high functioning. And yet, the first individual that was diagnosed with autism he was intelligent and verbal. And and yet for some reason they went to only those that would sit there and bang their head. I mean, the more um, severely challenged autistics they diagnosed as autism. They totally ignored, and even the DSM-5 separated what they call Asperger's syndrome, those that were intelligent and articulate, into a separate category because they said, well, they're smart enough they can compensate, i.e., mask, so therefore they don't need support. So everything about my life until I discovered autism was so baffling. So when I finally discovered autism, it was like, and this is the reaction I get from everyone when they first discover autism. Oh my God, now I finally understand me and who I am, as opposed to the feedback that you get from everyone else is they expect you to be like everyone else. You don't look different.
Mhm.
Yeah, you may act a little weird, but they expect you to be like everyone because that's all they know. So
Right.
from their perspective, you should be like them. And I quote clearly knew I wasn't. So I went from trying to understand the neurotypical brain to trying to understand the autistic brain. And that's become my passion.
Right.
So even at that stage when I was diagnosed, there was no support for those of us. Um, we had to band together and realize, hey, we have some power in numbers. We do exist, and it's time that our voices are heard. And so we started autism advocacy groups and uh, went around and lectured, which is what I did with Jim Sinclair, who was one of the very first autistic advocates, um, on helping people understand, because we felt that if they could understand how we perceive the world differently, then we could better communicate and work with them. But the disconnecting social communication, which is a core for autism, comes not it comes from the different perspectives that we come from. When
Mhm.
autistics are with other autistics, we communicate just fine.
Yeah.
It's when we're trying to communicate with a non-autistic that the different perspectives that we come from, the way we experience the world, makes communication difficult.
So what do you think as non-autistics, what can happen with both parties in order to kind of change that relationship, in order to improve that communication?
Pointing out our differences. Neurodiversity is what it's like diversity in nature. It makes life fascinating and interesting. When my older sister, now my uh, just younger than I, she has no interest whatsoever in my diagnosis as autism or even what it is. My older sister did, though. She listened, she was fascinated by it. She valued me and recognizes my differences. Um, Even though we have our own differences, especially politically, we are very close. We have a very close bond because she values my differentness and she listens to it. And you know what? I am fascinated with the way her brain works, and I praise her no end for her strengths that she has as a non-autistic. I'm fascinated by them, and so we have a real. It's the closest bond that I've ever had with anyone, my older sister, because she took an interest in understanding and listening and valuing me.
Something that seems so easy, but I know for many people can be hard because we're so rooted in our own biases. Um, what's one thing that you think people must misunderstand most about autistic brains? What would that be?
I think a lot of it has to do with processing speed. Everything happens very quickly. For the non-autistics, they make those connections. And I can see it in my sister's brain. Wow, how they can just make all these connections so quickly. Um, but then what they expect from us is that same kind of thing. And when we don't respond quickly enough, they become impatient or they talk too fast, faster than my brain can process the auditory that's coming in. So I try to scan for key words to get a gist of what they're talking about, but I miss sometimes important keywords. So this is where miscommunication occurs. And it's frustrating. So social becomes, I can't process as fast as people do. And I can pay attention to visual or auditory, but I can't process both at the same time.
Mhm.
And so it's the social that is so frustrating. And it's because of the processing time. I can't process everything that fast and that multiple to sort out what's important, what's not important. Just that my brain works differently.
And I know you've given this advice in the past, but that sounds like why you and other autistics ask people just get to the point. Just tell us what you're thinking. Get to the point. Don't fluff. Don't add non-literal language. Just get to the point and be blunt.
So all of this research is helping me better understand not only myself and that and feel what I missed in childhood, which was someone accepting me for who I am and feeling proud of who I am. I'm only now learning to accept me for who I am and be proud of who I am. When I discovered autism, I went to an autistic retreat so that I could be with lots of other autistics. I felt at home, but I was terrified that I had learned to mask so efficiently because I didn't think I had a choice. I was afraid they were going to reject me because I would come across as typical instead of autistic. And I mean, I was just terrified, but they didn't. They saw the autism in me. They accepted me for who I am. Um, and that's all I ever wanted. And I think every autistic, they say we don't want friends. That's not true. We
Right.
want relationships. We want friends. We just fear that expectations that we're going to be like them. That lack of acceptance of our differentness and valuing us for the person we are, not for who they want us to be.
Um,
Yeah.
so what advice would you have for parents, teachers, therapists about how to best support autistic individuals so they feel understood?
Taking an interest in how what they think about things and what their perspective is, and don't try to change it to be like yours or convince them yours is better. Share yours, but also listen to theirs and respect. Wow, that's really different. You know what? But mine is different too. Here's how and that's going to create such a bond like it did between my sister and I, in that I can see and value her for what she can do that I can't. But she also values and realizes what I can do that she can't and doesn't. Um, that's that's where the bond comes in a relationship. And oftentimes people, I know typical people take relationships slow because they feel vulnerable. They're protecting themselves from exposing, like, I don't know. I don't know very many non autistics that are willing to say, I don't know, because they feel like they should. Um, but I guess being a little more open about and sharing yourself with others even as a therapist, there's things you can share about your perspective of things and then take an interest in their perspective. They don't have to agree. You just find each other interesting and of value because of your differences, not because you're the same, because you're not.
Yeah, I love that. So again, great, what seems like simple advice, just listen, understand, accept, and that will start to build that bond. So wonderful information. I know we've known each other for a long time, but I always love hearing your perspective on all these topics and listening to your journey and sharing. This really is why therapists, teachers, and parents need to listen to autistic adults so they can understand their perspective. And like you said, it just builds a greater bond. So awesome. Thank you for sharing, Sue.
Thank you for asking, Staci.